from it. Let's look at l.lhu. I better write that down. l.lhu. That's about as close as we get in English. It's Turkish, really. The site's in modern-day Turkey, and who knows what the original inhabitants called it. Anyway, l.lhu wasn't the first agricultural settlement in the Near East, but it was pretty early, settled about 9,000 years ago, in the Neolithic period. And the settlement, town really, lasted about 1,000 years and grew to a size of about 8 or 10,000 people. That certainly makes it one of the largest towns in the world at that time. One of the things that makes a settlement of this size impressive is the time period. It's the Neolithic, remember, the late Stone Age, so the people that lived there had only stone tools, no metals. So everything they accomplished, like building this town, they did with just stone, plus wood, bricks, that sort of thing. But you gotta remember that it wasn't just any stone they had obsidian. And obsidian is a black, volcanic, well, almost like glass. It flakes very nicely into really sharp points. The sharpest tools of the entire Stone Age were made of obsidian, and the people of Çatalhöyük got theirs from further inland, from central Turkey. Traded for it, probably. Anyway, what I want to focus on is the way the town was built. The houses are all rectangular, one story, made of sun-dried bricks. But what's really interesting is that there are no spaces between them. No streets, in other words. And so, generally, no doors on the houses either. People walked around on the roofs and entered a house through a hatchway on the roof, down a wooden ladder. You can still see the diagonal marks of the ladders in the plaster on the inside walls. Once you were in the house, there would be one main room and a couple of small rooms for storage. The main room had the hearth for cooking and for heat. It would have been pretty cold during the winters. And it also looks like they made their tools near the fire. There tends to be a lot of obsidian flakes and chips in the hearth ashes, but no chimney. The smoke just went out the same hatchway the people used for going in and out themselves. So there would have been an open fire inside the house, with only one hole in the roof to let the smoke out. You and I would have found it a bit too smoky in there. You can see on the walls, which they plastered and decorated with paintings, they ended up with a layer of black soot on them, and so did people's lungs. The bones found in the graves show a layer of soot on the inside of the ribs. And that's another unusual feature of Çatalhöyük, the burial sites. The graves have all been found under the houses, right under the floors. And it may be this burial custom that explains why the houses were packed in so tightly without streets. I mean, you might think it was for protection or something, but there's been no evidence found yet of any violent attack that would indicate that kind of danger. It may be they wanted to live as near as possible to their ancestors' graves and be buried near them themselves. But it makes a good point. Based on excavations, we can know the layout of the houses and the location of the graves, but we're only guessing when we try to say why they did it that way. That's the way it is with archaeology. You're dealing with the physical remains the people left behind. We have no sure access to what they thought and how they felt about things. I mean, it's interesting to speculate, and the physical artifacts can give us clues, but there's a lot we can't really know. So, for instance, their art. They painted on the plaster walls, and usually they painted hunting scenes with wild animals in them. Now, they did hunt, and they also raised cereal crops and kept sheep, but we don't know why so many of the paintings are of hunting scenes. Was it supposed to have religious or magical significance? That's the kind of thing we can only guess at, based on clues, and hopefully further excavation of Çatalhöyük will yield more clues, but we'll probably never know for sure.
What is the lecture mainly about? What does the professor imply about the tools used by the people of l.lhu? What does the professor say about the entrances to the houses in l.lhu? What does the professor say about l.lhu graves? What does the professor think of the idea that the inhabitants of l.lhu deliberately arranged their houses so that they could live near their ancestors' graves? What are three things the professor says about the artwork of l.lhu? Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
For today's discussion, we'll review the case study on how some animals have behaviorally adapted to their environments. Now, you had to read about two animal species, the eastern marmot and the Olympic marmot. Marmots are rodents. They're large ground squirrels, about the size of an average house cat, and they live in a variety of habitats. And even though they spend a significant portion of the year hibernating, according to this case study, marmots are still considered excellent subjects for animal behavioral studies. Why is that?
Well, when they're not hibernating, you can find them in open areas, and they're pretty active during the day, which makes them easy to observe, right?
Uh-huh. So first let's discuss the eastern marmots. They reside throughout the eastern region of North America, where there's a temperate climate, where the growing season lasts for at least 5 months of the year, which is when they do all their mating, playing, and eating.
Oh, I see. At first, I wasn't sure what growing season meant, just from the reading, but now I get it. It's the amount of time it takes for them to grow, right? So it'd be 5 months?
Oh, I'm sorry, but no, it has nothing to do with that. It's not about the time it takes for eastern marmots to grow. It's when the food is available. That is, when it's not covered in snow and there's no frost covering the grass and vegetative parts of plants, herbs, and the flowers that marmots like to eat. So growing season refers to the availability of the food they eat, okay? So now, how would you describe the eastern marmot's social habits?
Well, they're really territorial and loners and just so aggressive, even with other eastern marmots. And their mating ritual is just so impersonal.
Uh-huh. Now, when they emerge in the spring from hibernation, the mating process begins. For them, well, they come together to mate and then they go their separate ways. Then, about 6 to 8 weeks after birth, the offspring leave their mothers.
Really? Just 6 weeks? Is it possible for the offspring to make it on their own so young?
Well, it's not as if they aren't ready for the real world, because they are. Remember, they mature quickly and the weather's nice. Also, they live in open fields where there's lots of edible vegetation. So, roughly 6 weeks after birth, eastern marmots are just old enough to take their chances of surviving in a temperate environment. So, how does this relate to their behavior?
Oh, I get it. Since the climate's not too bad, the eastern marmots don't have to rely on each other too much, and they really don't need to stay together as a family to survive either.
Uh-huh. And in contrast, the Olympic marmots, what about them?
Well, they live together as a family and take care of their young until they're at least 2 years old. They're really friendly with each other, and what I really like is that they even have breeding ceremonies. And they're not at all aggressive and territorial like the eastern marmots. So their social behavior is so different from the eastern marmots because of the climate where they live. That seems so bizarre.
Well, the Olympic marmots inhabit meadows high in the Olympic Mountains where the weather conditions are much harsher, so there's a lot more wind and snow. The growing season only lasts about 2 to 3 months. So, in that much shorter period of time, all the Olympic marmots, male and female, eat, play, work, and nurture the young together. Because the climate is so harsh, cooperation increases the survival rate of the Olympic marmots. They keep their young at home until they're physically able to survive on their own. This could explain why the social behavior of the Olympic marmots is so unlike that of the eastern marmots.
What is the main topic of the lecture?